Hey guys, we had some big breaking news this morning with regard to Israel that we wanted to bring you a few actually major updates for you this morning. So first and foremost, the temporary truce is over. Put this up on the screen. The truce has expired. Israel has resumed their assault. International mediators said that talks were continuing in the hopes of quickly reviving the truce. But as of now, you had Hamas blaming Israel for the collapse of the ceasefire, saying in a statement it had offered to release more hostages, including older people, but that Israel had made a, quote, prior decision to resume the criminal aggression. That is Hamas's side of the story. Israel says that Hamas violated the ceasefire agreement by firing on Israel and failing to release as many hostages as it had promised. Hamas released 8 hostages on Thursday. That was 2 fewer than expected after releasing at least 94 since the truce began. And Saagar, basically where we are at this point is the original agreement that enabled this temporary ceasefire had to do with women and children. Well, now at this point, most of the women and children have been released. So what Hamas is saying, and, take it for what it's worth, is that they've been trying to expand that deal to include other categories of people. And Israel at this point has been relatively uninterested. We've covered on our show, of course, comments from Netanyahu and also comments from Defense Minister Gallant about how they are very committed to going back to the war, to even expanding the war and focusing on the south of the Strip. And in fact, this morning we can also report, put this up on the screen, flagged by our own Ryan Grimm, they are leafleting in Khan Yunis. That is one of the cities in the southern part of the Gaza Strip where people had fled. And they are warning them that they need to evacuate Khan Yunis lest before this next bombing campaign begins. And we already also know this morning that some of those bombs have already begun dropping, and we've had reports of dozens of people already killed in renewed hostilities.
Yeah, so all of this fits basically what was telegraphed, but the big question is around how long this is going to go. And there's a big dueling strategy between what the United States and really the Western allies of Israel want, and then what Israel itself is planning on doing. So we can go ahead and put this up there on the screen. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken reportedly told the Israelis behind the scenes, he said, you have weeks, not months, to prosecute this campaign. The Israelis are like, no, I really don't think so. And actually, Krystal, just breaking this morning from the Financial Times with a leak from Tel Aviv and the Israeli War Cabinet says, quote, Israel plans for a long war, aims to kill the top 3 Hamas leaders. They say that the intensive ground strategy in Gaza will continue into early 2024. Obviously, that is one where, that could mean anything. That could mean January. It also could mean March or April, depending on which way that you want to look at it. The top 3 Hamas leaders inclusion in that actually includes people who are currently living in Doha. So that'll be an interesting thing. But most importantly is they are basically trying to do or telegraphing that they want to do to Khan Yunis what they did in North Gaza, which puts them directly at odds with what the U.S. and growing calls for limiting and changing Israeli tactics here in the U.S. They want to do the exact same thing to envelop the city of Khan Yunis, cut it off from the south. So we will see multiple more ground incursions, most likely from a forward operating in North Gaza. Gaza City could be a staging area, and also the shared border. What they did previously to Gaza City is they cut it off from the south in terms of fleeing both fighters and civilians, and then came in from the top and enveloped the entire thing while having airstrikes. Now, the airstrikes have already resumed. It's difficult to pin down exactly where, but even some reported at the Rafah crossing, like previously, that we had seen. And of course, what we have to always think about are the 2 million or so people who remain inside of Gaza, who were told and are being told now to flee. This effectively, while it was already one of the most densely populated places in the world, they are now fleeing the quote-unquote evacuation zone in the south and trying to limit people. It's difficult to see without a map, but if you think about the first third is basically been occupied, most of the civilian infrastructure has been destroyed. Now we're moving on to the second third, and everybody's being or at least ideally compressed into this a small, tiny area of the Strip, which raises the question of where the hell they want to go. And is, I think, is going to significantly increase questions and pressure and high stakes negotiations, because I just also saw from the Wall Street Journal increasing calls from Israeli leaders who are pressuring the U.S. officials. They're like, you guys need to take some of these Palestinians, or you need to pressure the Arab states to accept them. And of course, the Palestinians themselves are very reluctant to take that deal, simply because they don't think that they'll ever be able to come back. This this goes to much more meta questions around all of this. But I think we could say with probably good confidence that the truce is over, at least in the form that we knew it. If there is a temporary ceasefire, it possibly could maybe a day or two, something like that. But the willingness of the Israeli forces to restart the campaign, it looks pretty ironclad. And that is a rebuke, I think, of the Biden administration, who very publicly was like, we don't want this to restart. So it also shows you the limits of U.S. diplomacy.
Well, especially when that diplomacy only comes with like, please listen to what we're saying, and not the actual use of any of the cards that we could very easily play if we wanted to. And let me read a little bit of the specifics of what Tony Blinken reportedly told the Israeli War Cabinet, because it shows you just how at odds the administration, at least what they're saying, is from the Israeli War Cabinet, of course, led by Netanyahu. So these reported remarks were quoted in Hebrew. This is a translation by Channel 12 News, which is part of why it's like English is a little bit choppy. Anyway, Blinken said, according to them, quote, "You can't operate in southern Gaza in the way you did in the north. There are 2 million Palestinians there. You need to evacuate fewer people from their homes, be more accurate in the attacks, not hit UN facilities, and ensure there are enough protected areas for civilians. And if not, then don't attack where there is a civilian population." And he goes on to ask, what is your system of operation? He told them at one point in no uncertain words, you do not have months, you have weeks. Now, again, is U.S. influence going to be brought to bear to try to guarantee that result? Remains to be seen. We haven't seen any of that thus far. He also raised the question of the day after. All right, after you finish your bombing campaign and your ground invasion and all of this, what then? Of course, the Netanyahu government has floated all sorts of trial balloons, which we've discussed here, one of which seems to be their ideal solution of pushing everybody out, as you're talking about, Saagar, either into, neighboring Arab countries or some to the U.S. or exclusively into Egypt. But they won't actually commit to what their real goal is. And Blinken said, you don't want the Palestinian Authority on the day after. We understand that. That's what the solution the U.S. has been pushing. The best way to kill an idea is to bring a better idea. The other states in the region need to know what you are planning. So putting pressure there as well. But again, clearly, and I think with the restart of this bombing campaign, and, which thus far seems to be approached in exactly the same way that the northern bombing campaign occurs, they don't care what the U.S. says behind the scenes or leaks to the press, etc. There's no evidence that they care about our words and our secret displeasure with their actions. To the point you were making, Saagar, you have so many people condensed now in this very small area that the possibility of even greater civilian death is very real, very real. There's a report that came out. I don't know if you had a chance to read it. It's from this 972 magazine. I may dig into it more on Monday, talking about the way they have approached this war and how it's actually been different than some of the tactics that they've used previously, even within Gaza. And one of the major categories of targets that they've approached are so-called power targets. These are things like major buildings, high-rise apartment buildings, where in previous wars, it's not that they would have put them off limits, but they would have at least tried to make sure that the civilians had left before they struck these targets. This time around, they made these power targets and individual residential homes their primary targets, not because this was the best way to degrade Hamas's capability. Far from it. Some of these buildings have very limited relationship to Hamas whatsoever, but because they want to shock the population into putting pressure on Hamas. So those are the sort of tactics that Blinken is referring to here when he says you can't do in the South what you did in the North. The North is destroyed. Like, there is nothing left to go back to. Effectively, all of the civilian life and infrastructure in the North has been gutted. So that's where we are right now today. And this comes also as there is a stunning report from the New York Times about, we were debating whether you can even call it an intelligence failure at this point. They knew, put this up on the screen, about the October 7th plans more than a year in advance. Israeli officials obtained Hamas's battle plan, I'm reading now, for the October 7th terrorist attack a year before it happened. Documents, emails, and interviews show. But Israeli military and intelligence officials dismissed the plan as aspirational, considering it too difficult for Hamas to carry out. The translated document didn't set a date for the attack, but described a methodical assault designed to overwhelm the fortifications around the Gaza Strip, take over Israeli cities, and storm key military bases, including a division headquarters. They go on to say they followed this blueprint with shocking precision. You're talking about it called for a barrage of rockets to start, drones to knock out the security cameras, and automated machine guns along the border, gunmen to pour into Israel en masse in paragliders, on motorcycles, and on foot, all of which happened on October 7th. And not only that, so they've got this document laying out the plan. They also had an intelligence unit that was monitoring activities in Gaza Strip. And these analysts were saying, we're watching them prepare for these attacks. We see them training. We see what they're doing. They're serious about this. And those concerns by the higher ups from this, by the way, all-female unit were completely dismissed in spite of the fact that they had this intelligence right in front of their face of what they were planning. It is truly astonishing that this was missed.
Yeah, this is not an intelligence failure because it's clearly the intelligence worked. This is a leadership failure through and through. There's no other way to describe it. It also, there was a lot of talk after 9/11, not only of the intelligence failure, but everyone was like, oh, it was a failure of imagination. I mean, here, it just seems to be that they just simply did not believe that Hamas was capable of a large-scale military operation, despite almost 20 years now of them warning that they have military capabilities, rockets, terrorists, they have all of these weapons. And this is why, you have to just be deeply skeptical here, when they say, Bibi says we need a long war, well, the longer this thing goes on, the better off it is for him. The more farther away he can get up from October 7th, the less questions are going to be asked about what happened. He says, we'll talk about the failures the day after the war, but for now, we're going to continue to fight the war. And you can't help but think he's one of the least popular prime ministers now in all of Israeli history. The coalition government behind him that continues to support him is held on by a thread, largely by most of his furthest right elements, and he has a direct incentive. So this is, again, why I just think if he truly cared about Israel, he would resign. There's just no question. You need a leader with actual confidence for the Israeli public, and also to negotiate in best faith for whenever you're sitting across the table from the U.S., from all of the Western allies. So yeah, reading through it, it's shocking because what's crazy is the plan was followed almost to a T. Right. The blueprint of where and how to attack, not just the paragliders, their area, where to go,
what base to do, they wanted to overrun, how they were going to distract them with the rockets. They knew that they had been distracted already in the West Bank by the extremist factions of the Netanyahu coalition, all of it to a T. I mean, it's incredible reading these emails that this intelligence analyst was sending, trying her best to send up a warning. She said, I utterly refute that the scenario is imaginary, she wrote in one email. The Hamas training exercise, she said, fully matched the content of Jericho Wall, which is the name of this document that they were able to obtain. It is a plan designed to start a war, she added. It is not just a raid on a village. I mean, just as direct as she possibly can. And they just dismissed it. And I think it speaks to, a complete level of arrogance. Right, Netanyahu has this idea, we control the height of the flames. Obviously not. I think it speaks to a level of contempt for Palestinians of like, they're not capable of anything approaching this. So, which ties into the arrogance. Also a level of overconfidence in their technology, their fancy wall with all their super top tech, super expensive, with their remote control machine guns, etc., which we know from what unfolded on October 7th was mostly disabled by
it failed totally.
Cheap off-the-shelf drone technology, something that an ordinary citizen could easily purchase and acquire. They were able to, and this is part of why the response also failed for many hours. People were left on their own to fend for themselves when you have this, ragtag bunch of terrorists versus one of the preeminent militaries in the entire world. So it is stunning to see this level of failure. And of course, many people are drawing comparisons to the intelligence failure we suffered before 9/11, where again, it wasn't that we didn't have the information, it's that people didn't do anything about it and didn't take it seriously.
To be honest, Krystal, this is worse because we knew so the famous warning, I think it was August 2001, bin Laden determined to strike the U.S. We knew that 2 of the hijackers were in the United States. The Saudis definitely knew it too, probably helped him, but that's just conjecture, I guess. We did not know about the World Trade Center. We didn't know about the Pentagon. It was a cell of only 19 people. That's another reason why this makes it even more stunning. You had almost 1,500 people who participated in this attack. That's literally what, 100 times more than the number who participated in 9/11. So 9/11 is not even comparable in terms of the planning and the scale. It would be as if the CIA and the FBI literally knew. They were like, they were going to hit the World Trade Center with 2 Boeing 737s. They're going to hijack multiple things. They're going to use box cutters. These are their attacks. They're going to strike in the morning. That's basically the level of precision that Israel had on this, and they ignored it. So look, I don't think you can. And this is where the most normie critique of Netanyahu is just so obvious. There's 2 options. Either he ignored it, and so did the Israeli leadership, or his bullshit and cult of personality, where he centered all Israeli politics around him, distracted the entire populace and top leadership away from what should have been focused on security. And in that vacuum, Hamas, perfect storm, they were able to pull off this attack. So I think it's 10 times worse than 9/11.
Well, and let's not forget that, Netanyahu's longtime plan in order to thwart a Palestinian state that he, has stated multiple times is we need to bolster Hamas because then we can use them as an excuse for not being able to pursue a peace and keep the West Bank and the Gaza Strip separated with, again, this idea, this arrogant idea that, we'll control the height of the flames. And, so I can control what's going on here. I'm Mr. Security. So it really is quite stunning. It will also feed the conspiracy that this was effectively like a false flag, like they let it happen intentionally, which I don't buy, and I'll tell you why, but I'm curious your thoughts. Because this is such a political disaster for Netanyahu.
Yes, that's why I don't buy it.
He is ideological. There's no doubt about it, right? That he's very ideological person, but his number one ideology is to himself and his own grip on power. And you would have to be a complete fool, which I do not think that he is, to think this was going to be somehow good for you politically. So that's why I don't buy that. I think it's just sheer incompetence. But that doesn't mean that, as many nefarious leaders do when a crisis hits, that they don't then try to use that crisis to effectuate whatever their personal, political, and ideological goals are. And that's exactly what we're seeing unfold right now.
Yeah, agreed 100%. Okay, we're going to have another update for you now on Gavin Newsom and the Ron DeSantis debate. Let's get to it. Okay, and now turning to the hottest event in American politics. Not really. The Gavin Newsom Rumble and Fox News hosted by Sean Hannity versus Ron DeSantis debate. The 2 differing ideologies and the governors facing off. And it was certainly something, and we've pulled what we think are some of the best moments from that. We should note, too, the way that we pulled these is, I think, very different than how a lot of others are digesting in terms of what actually matters electorally. What is really going to hit home according to the priorities of Americans? First and foremost was a pretty strong opening from Governor Gavin Newsom, where he played off the initial attacks from Governor Ron DeSantis. But more importantly, he actually hit DeSantis for his underperformance so far in the GOP primary while parrying some of his attacks. Let's take a listen to that.
There are profound differences tonight, and I look forward to engage them. But there's one thing in closing that we have in common is neither of us will be the nominee for our party in 2024.
The reason that we pulled that one, Krystal, I think, is that A, it shows the political adeptness that was displayed throughout the entire debate by Newsom. Anytime, I think DeSantis landed several legitimate critiques against Newsom. Newsom, though, is a politician, and this is the magic of television. He, in a greasy fashion, moves himself all the way around it, turns it actually into an attack and a parry, and then gets underneath DeSantis's skin, who has that artificial smile on his face for the entire entire time. And I actually thought it was a very effective way for Newsom to constantly needle DeSantis throughout the entire thing. Because if this were just a debate on its face between, if neither of them were presidential aspirants or any of that, I think it would have been totally different. But DeSantis has to both manage his presidential campaign of trying to differ himself from Trump and all of that. And Newsom then can use the polling position to constantly undercut DeSantis by borrowing, and we're going to show you this in a little bit, borrowing talking points from the Trump campaign to hit DeSantis, which was very effective to parry him from a lot of these. Overall, that's what I thought his best political strength throughout the entire night was.
Newsom is a slippery MF.
He's good, man.
And this was not easy, right? Because you're going up against DeSantis and you're going up against Sean Hannity and Fox News. I mean, every single question was, and the stats they put up were designed to be like, California bad, Florida good.
These are the facts, Governor.
Yeah, these are the facts. Exactly. And so, and it was, I mean, literally every single question, right? So he is very good at just being like a classic politician. Anything they would hit him with, like they hit him with crime stats that you look at and you're like, I don't know how he's going to handle this one. But he was ready for it. He was like, all right, let's focus in on these cities. Let's focus in on the murder rate and how you have a worse murder rate than we do. Let's talk about Parkland and use that very emotional event to land blows as well. I mean, partly the topic choice was very predictable. You know, we're going to talk about homelessness. We're going to talk about crime. We're going to talk about like cost of living and taxes. So he was able to be extremely prepared. He's a talented guy. One thing that hit for me in watching it is the fact that a lot of the younger politicians like Beto and Cory Booker and Pete Buttigieg, they've modeled their speaking style after Obama in a way that I don't think really works for anyone but Obama. Newsom being a little bit older, he actually seems like he models the cadence of Bill Clinton.
Good point.
Which I think is more of a sort of like universally effective speaking style. In any case, you're not going to knock that guy off of his game. He's much more comfortable on camera. That much is really clear. But maybe this will be a surprise for people. I thought DeSantis did fine. I think conservatives probably liked what he had to say. I saw a lot of takes that were like, I don't know why DeSantis even agreed to this, but I do. This guy's down in the polls. He's got nothing to lose. He needs attention. He needs some kind of something around his campaign. And so in a weird way, if you're going to talk about winners and losers, I actually kind of thought they both won. Because DeSantis just needs attention and to prove he's up to the challenge and can own a lib when he needs to. And for Newsom, obviously, all he wants is to remain relevant through this period when Biden is the nominee and be able to keep himself in the conversation until next time around. And I'm sure he impressed a lot of people, too, in terms of his debating skills. So I actually thought this event kind of served them both pretty well.
I'm glad that you said that because that was going to be my other test. I was like, why would he do this? This was such a disaster. No, I thought it was actually great for DeSantis. This is also a Rorschach test. If you are a liberal, you're going to come away thinking Governor Gavin Newsom won. And if you're a conservative, you're going to come away thinking that DeSantis won because both played to the most emotive and important issues for their individual bases, unsurprisingly, to their strengths. And actually, I think did a good job. That said, if we're looking at it from an electoral perspective, one of the ways that, again, Newsom was constantly able to get under DeSantis' skin was to use the Trump criticism against him, especially on COVID. And that's what we're about to show you here, where DeSantis consistently made COVID lockdown school policy, I think, to great effect to be able to hit Newsom. But Newsom, in his showing, again, his political skill, and hits back, and he was like, no, you were a lockdown governor. You wore a mask in September. So let's take a listen to some of that.
You passed an emergency declaration before the state of California did. You closed down your beaches, your bars, your restaurants.
False.
It's a fact. You had quarantines.
False.
You had quarantines. You had checkpoints all over the state of Florida. By the way, I didn't say that. Donald Trump laid you out on this, dead to right. You did that.
True.
You followed science. You followed Fauci.
That's not false.
He followed science. He followed Fauci. You were promoting. Hold on. You were promoting vaccines. You were promoting vaccines. You even wore a mask in September. Sean,
you were closed.
If it's okay with you, we'll do this.
Why were you closed?
Why don't we do this
for so
in a way where we both can have
Why were you closed
opportunity?
for so long?
You wore
You
a
were
mask
closed.
with
Guys,
Donald Trump
closed.
outside
I'm trying to let it breathe.
in September
Gavin,
2020. He did all of
Governor
that
Newsom.
until he decided to fall prey to the fringe of his party. And as a consequence of that, Ron, tens of thousands of people lost their lives.
Not true.
The equivalent if I had your policies, the equivalent of 10 9/11s, tens of thousands of people lost their lives. And for what, Ron?
See, clearly, he's like, no. You changed your mind later on. You, pursued some of the Fauci policy or whatever, March through September, because you were following along this same line. That's something that Trump himself has used against you. The best, possible parry on all of that. So from that perspective, again, with Newsom, I thought that his single best ability was to take uncomfortable moments and to either take control of the debate, laugh at Sean Hannity, immediately start questioning DeSantis himself, and just ignore the criticism.
From that perspective,
he never looked ruffled. And this is where I want to come back to this. Newsom loves the game. He is a politician who is comfortable in his own shark skin. And that is something you either have that or you don't. Buttigieg, the rest of them, they all look a little bit under the lights, not ready for prime time. And at a certain point, Newsom's been in the game for 20 years. And more importantly, he just loves it. And you can't take away that smile for somebody who loves to be in the middle of the arena. Also, the fact that he was against not only DeSantis, but on Hannity and came with such a structural disadvantage and still came away relatively unscathed from a optics point of view, that's really good. But I have to come back to this. I thought it was good for DeSantis. Net. He got some good. Some clips out of it. He's going to go viral amongst the right-wing people. I bet he'll get some more. I think he's going to get some more, donations and things out of this. Look, let's face it. The guy's not going to be the GOP nominee, barring unforeseen circumstances. So this was probably the best thing for him to do.
Yeah, listen, if you're just putting the ideology aside, and I'm not a Gavin Newsom fan whatsoever, so I think I'm able to watch it and just think about how it's probably landing and who's more politically skilled. Like, there's no question Gavin Newsom is more politically skilled than Ron DeSantis. It's really not even close. DeSantis had these couple of talking points about, like, people fleeing your state, and he looked more ruffled. Obviously, his face, like, let's not even talk about his face. Every time the camera's on him, it's awkward. He doesn't know what to do with it, right? It is a thing. And Newsom's out there looking supremely confident, taking over as moderator at times. In terms of doing the traditional politician thing, you're not going to find someone much better than Gavin Newsom. So, so in any case, I think it served both of their interests pretty well. But DeSantis had some decent moments, and Saagar, you flagged this one, which was harkens back to what has been the biggest critique of the Newsom administration and helped to launch that recall campaign against him, which he ended up defeating pretty easily, but did gain some traction there on the ground. Was that he had a different set of rules for himself and his conduct during the pandemic versus all of the underclass and all of the rules that were applied to them. DeSantis hit him pretty effectively on that. Let's take a listen.
They tax too much. They regulate too much. They have a political agenda. It's not a good climate for business. They've lost a lot of companies. A lot of companies have moved to Texas. We have had some to Florida, but they've lost a lot of companies to Texas because they're not doing a good job looking out for folks and not creating a good business environment. And, when I have people that come to Florida, they tell me, you guys actually want us to succeed in Florida. And they feel like when they're in California, they don't want business to succeed.
Is that what Disney's saying, the Tampa Bay Rays?
Well, actually, I think that's an interesting point with Disney because I had Disney open during COVID. And we made them a fortune, and we saved a lot of jobs. You had Disney closed inexplicably for over a year. You were not following science. You were a lockdown governor. You did a lot of damage to your people. You had more kids locked out of school for a longer period of time in California than anywhere else in the country. It was the working class kids. It was the middle income kids. His kids were in private school. They were in class in person. He locked people out because of the teachers' union. He is owned by the teachers' union. You will never cross the teachers' union.
This is just a lot of hot
lock, stock, and barrel.
Let's talk about
Saagar, what do you think of that moment?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's his best talking point. He's like, I did this one way, I did this the other way. I thought his second best talking point was about people who were leaving the state. This is, again, where I have to marvel, though, at Newsom. Newsom somehow jujitsu'd and was like, well, per capita, more people are leaving Florida. It's like, dude, that's not the conversation.
He had his talking point, which checks out, apparently, is that more people have left Florida to go to California than have left California to go to Florida. I
agree, but it's on a per capita basis, whereas DeSantis talking about the overall number. Again, In my opinion, that's bullshit. Because
but he muddied the waters enough.
Exactly.
And because the other thing is, probably a lot of Californians are not going to Florida. They're going to Texas, right? Or they're going to Arizona or Nevada or whatever.
Exactly.
And so he came prepared. He knew this was going to be a big talking point. All he needed to do was muddy the waters and be like, no, actually, we're getting more Florida residents. I don't know what you're talking about. And then the average person is like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Who
right.
knows?
The average person's like, what? What does PolitiFact say? Oh, wait, per capita? What is it? I'm not entirely sure what that means. What's for breakfast? Whereas I'm watching this and I'm just like, I can't believe that he somehow did that. But it is his best talking point. No question. I mean, this is why DeSantis ultimately turned the state red, is people were very satisfied with the way that he handled the pandemic and schools. That's the best single mirror that he can hold up against Newsom. There's no question that the Newsom approach was a massive failure, especially, and this was another important moment that he would sprinkle through, was about the literacy rates, Florida versus California, in school versus not in school. Florida still, though, dipping below, unfortunately, just because school closure, even the small amount that did occur there, it was enough to cause ramifications. But it brings it back to that point. I thought, though, that DeSantis's weakest moment, and this is the one everyone keeps, so like his facial structure and all that, I agree, it's not good, but that's ever present. I thought his weakest electoral moment was on abortion. He was DeSantis is very comfortable school closure, COVID, culture war. I actually thought he won either or drew on every single one of those. He threw Newsom on his heels whenever it came to a lot of the culture war curriculum stuff, but he was rattled as hell whenever it came to abortion. You could really see Newsom hit his stride during that portion of the debate. Let's take a listen.
Hold on. Respectfully, this is an important conversation. Will you or will you not support
you didn't
a national
answer Sean. Why didn't you answer his question?
Or will you not support a national ban if it lands on your desk? You couldn't answer that in any other context.
Okay,
answer
gentlemen,
it tonight. It's a
we're
simple
moving
yes
on
no.
to
By
the
the way,
next issue.
Hey, no, Sean, not a
You
next
never
issue.
gave a week.
The American people should know this. I'll answer it for Ron DeSantis. He can't answer it. He will sign that extreme 6-week
let me move on.
So again, Newsom taking control, questioning DeSantis not confident at all in his 6-week ban, doesn't know what to do. Most of the Republicans, pro-lifers, have been trying to pivot this about late-term abortion. But the truth is that late-term abortion is just not, electorally salient. So for me, that was the most electoral problem for DeSantis in that entire debate. And it just shows you the albatross around their neck where they don't know how to handle this issue. And that showed me again Newsom's political skill, where, look, I would like for some of these culture war issues to be more salient, but the truth is, it's like they're not at all, as we have seen when you're put up against abortion. And he used the knife that he had very, very effectively in going after DeSantis on abortion.
Yeah, it's also just, you see his level of confidence up there. Even being 2-1 against him, being on Fox News, he is taking control of the whole situation. And the other thing I would point out about that moment is I'm pretty sure that was the only even slightly adversarial question that Sean Hannity asked of Ron DeSantis, which was like, why did you switch from 15-week ban to 6-week ban? That was as harsh as it got for him. And even that little bit of adversarial questioning, he sort of crumbles under. And it's one of these things that it's like, you're going to get that question. Like, this is going to be, maybe he didn't expect to get it from Fox News. I don't know. But he should certainly expect that he's got to have an answer for this on the campaign trail, whether it's on Fox News or elsewhere. And you could just see that Newsom much steadier on his feet there. I mean, that is a clear place of strength for the Democratic Party at this point. But what was impressive to me about Newsom, who, again, I'm not a fan of. I think he's slippery. I think he's done some horrible things with regard to labor. I think he's completely beholden to the donor class in California. Anytime labor priorities come up against Hollywood or Silicon Valley, he's back in Hollywood. He's back in Silicon Valley. So it's not like I like this guy, but you got to admire the game. He was able to take even the most difficult things about crime in California, or about people leaving California, or about the tax rate in California, whatever, in front of a conservative audience, and at the very least muddy the waters and do it very confidently and actually win on a number of these points in very, very difficult circumstances. So I think he handled himself well. I couldn't help but be impressed. And again, DeSantis, he didn't embarrass himself. I think he did fine. I think a lot of conservatives enjoyed what he had to say. His campaign right now, Saagar, we got to admit, it's like on the ropes. I mean, not only because he's still so far down from Trump and it continues to kind of like be a wider and wider gap, but Nikki Haley just got the Coke endorsement. and all of the billions that come with that, and all of the donor class sort of consolidation that comes with that. And so he's really in kind of a corner, desperate situation right now. He's got to do whatever he can to try to get some attention, try to have some moments, and try to rescue himself from permanent political irrelevancy, honestly.
Absolutely. No, it was the right call on his part. I think he'll come out better. This might be one of the high water marks for him, certainly, whenever we're looking back on all of that. But it was interesting. I would like to see more of it. I actually would.
I kind of enjoyed it, to be honest with you.
The one thing I wish, Krystal, was that DeSantis wasn't running for president. It would have changed the stakes, and it actually would have made it more policy focused. And I would have enjoyed that more. So, but at the same time, who's going to agree to be doing this if they're not presidential aspirants? So
Kyle made the comment, which I think is right. It kind of felt like a throwback, like back to like an Obama-Romney debate, or, you know, something like that, like before Trump just scrambled all the circuitry and like injected this whole other chaotic force into politics. It was like, you know, you can imagine a parallel universe where these are the two nominees and you're having this sort of, you know, I mean, it's partisan and it's silly at times and parts of it are disgusting, etc. But it's this sort of like quote unquote normal political debate. That is what it felt like. It felt like kind of a throwback.
I agree. Okay, guys, we will see you all later. I hope you enjoyed this Friday morning update, and we will see you on Monday.